me anything and talk about any topics you would like, social science and history related. We have been at this for 6 months. It is our 6 month anniversary. We are going to be talking about a few different historical topics that some of my wonderful patrons on the channel have brought up to me, and I will be talking about them, including the Safavids, the gunpowder empires, and what the Middle East looked like in the 1500s and 1600s. So I'll be talking a little bit about that, and of course, I've also done a couple of videos analyzing the convention. This is not a political channel, it's a history channel, but we've had a historic week when it comes to presidential politics in American history. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that, something very important. Also, for those of you who are interested, that is my lamp on the left side. It is the lamp on the right side that is not working now. So got to get both bulbs, and then next week my goal is to have both lamps going for you. So weekly Q&A, make sure to ask me anything history related. Happy to talk about that. But I've got a few topics to go over. So the first topic, and once again, if you like this content, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, check out my content. I'm uploading a lot daily. I think I broke the record. I had 5 daily history videos yesterday and 13 videos overall. So trying to get as much content out there, trying to pump out some vital and important historical information, because as I talk about a lot on the channel, history really matters. Not just because if we don't learn about history, we're doomed to repeat it. None of that, really. It's more that history tells us where we have come from and tells us who we are and where we are going. So history is really important. The subscription, the help, the likes, all of that is really helpful. Any useful feedback is always appreciated. And if you subscribe, I always try to do a video in your honor. And somebody just recently subscribed and asked me to talk about the Safavids. So I'm going to be doing a long-term video about that. Try to do one longer length video a week along with all of the daily content in the shorts. So trying to get started and keep going there, moving in a positive direction. And the 6 months have been really successful, and I owe all of that to my loyal listeners and to everybody who comes to the live streams and everybody who comments on the videos and checks out my daily work. So really appreciate that. I did not expect to be here 6 months ago, but you have made it possible, so I really appreciate that. So the Safavid Empire, maybe the best empire you've never heard of. The Safavids were originally created by his name. I'm trying to remember his name, but he was a general who overthrew it was in the midst of the fall of what was called the Timurid Empire, which was centered in Afghanistan, which broke apart in the 1500s, as empires always do. One empire always replaces another. If history's shown us anything, it's that one empire falls and another one rises in its place. And when that empire crumbles, we get cycles, kind of a vacuum of power, and other empires and kingdoms rise up. For instance, Alexander the Great had conquered Afghanistan. Then when he died and his generals split up his empire, Afghanistan kind of became this own space called the Bactria Empire. I know that sounds like it's from like Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek, but that is the actual name of an empire, believe it or not. The Greeks replaced the Persians, and the Romans replaced the Greeks. One empire replaces another. A lot of people could argue that that America is an empire and it has replaced the British Empire. The Russian Empire fell apart. A bunch of empires fell apart at the end of World War I, and some could argue the Americans took over from there. So, interesting. Yeah, Afghanistan's an amazing place with a great history, and a lot of people don't know about it. It is one of the most successful countries when it comes to repelling invaders. It can be conquered, but it can't really be controlled. The Greeks learned this the hard way. The British learned this the hard way. The Soviet Union learned it the hard way, and the Americans most recently have learned it the hard way. So, hey, hello, welcome. So weekly Q&A, anything about history you want to bring up, social sciences, questions, be sure to ask me anything. Axum Empire, the greatest of all. Yeah, that's a good one. That's in Africa, Ethiopia, modern-day Ethiopia. Really, really cool. I'm from where I am. I'll let you guys figure that out. My chair right here in my living room with my lamp that is now working. So, yeah, hello, welcome. So, anything you want to talk about, social science related, political science related, history related, I am here. That is my job. That is what we do every every week, Saturdays at 6 Eastern. Yep, thanks for coming. Really glad to have you here. If you like the content, be sure to like and subscribe. Yeah. Okay, thank you for coming. So, Afghanistan, really powerful, interesting place, never really could be conquered or subdued, and there's been a bunch of empires. They call it the graveyard of empires because a lot of empires go there. The Russians, the British, and many would argue the Americans, and they can't get out of there. The Greeks were unable to keep control over it. One empire falls, and everyone takes its place. Hello, welcome. I'm trying to, like I said, I'm from right where I am. You can probably figure by my intonation and the way I talk that I'm an American, although some people have said that I sound European. So, hello, welcome. But anyways, so one of the topics I want to talk about is one of those empires. So when an empire falls, then everyone takes its place. And the Timurid Empire in Afghanistan is an Afghan empire, Central Asian empire, falls apart and is replaced by the Safavids in Persia. And basically, the Safavid Empire is in modern day Iran. Back then, it was called Persia. Yeah, it's a great country with so much amazing history. And yes, they are definitely more of a tribal people with a background. So that's why the modern state of Afghanistan wasn't created until the 1740s. Shortly after the Safavids fell apart, the Safavids controlled Afghanistan. That was part of their sphere of influence. And basically, the first ruler of the Safavid Empire, I can't remember his name at the moment, was a Shia Muslim rather than a Sunni Muslim. And he created the empire, most of the empires that had occupied Persia, the Ilkhanate, which were the Mongols, the Timurids, and other Muslim empires such as the Abbasid Caliphate were all Muslim. But what made the Safavids interesting was not just that they were Muslim; they were Shia Muslim. Iran, which is what Persia is called now, I believe it was given that name Iran by the French or the British when they occupied it after World War One. Iran is the largest Shia Muslim population in the world to this day, which has caused a lot of problems in that area of the world when you are surrounded by Sunnis. So we see with the Safavid Empire, they're a Shia empire, and basically the way Persia, modern day Iran, becomes Shia is through the Safavids, between Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya. That's a really good question. Let me finish up real fast about the Safavids, and then I'll talk about that because that's really interesting stuff. Basically, the Safavids. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. The Safavids are a powerful empire, and the ruler of the Safavid Empire basically tries to create, playing the Japanese bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Talked about that a lot in the channel. I will definitely talk about that now in a minute. Some good questions here in the channel. So yeah, basically the Safavids, the ruler of the Safavids creates Twelver Shia Islam. And he brings it to, which basically means that he is the greatest descendant of Muhammad, and the descendants of Muhammad must rule over the Muslim people. That is what Shia Islam believes, as opposed to Sunni Islam, which believes that the best rulers and the most loyal to Allah were supposed to rule the Muslim people. So that creates a big difference and a lot of tension. And it creates tension because the Safavids are between two Muslim empires, the Ottomans in the west and the Mughal Indian Empire in the east. Talk about India. And those two empires kind of surround it, and they are constantly fighting with each other throughout its history. So you've got these three empires. They're called the gunpowder empires because they're these really powerful Muslim empires that rely on gunpowder, cannon fire, artillery, especially the Ottomans. They're really deadly, they're really powerful, and they kind of divide up and fight over the Middle East and Central Southern Asia during the 16th, 17th century. So really interesting thing there. So that is how Persia, modern day Iran, became Shia Muslim, and that is why there is so much division between Shia Muslims in Iran and other places in the Middle East that are Sunni, such as Saudi Arabia. So any views on the war between Alexander and Chandragupta Maurya? So Alexander gets to India, and he's actually very successful, like he is basically everywhere. What a lot of people don't know is that India was not just a bunch of peasants. It was an established empire with a lot going on. Alexander encounters the Mauryan Empire, which is basically India's first empire in the Indian subcontinent. Modern day, when we talk about India in history, we are not just referring to India. We are referring to Pakistan and Bangladesh. We are referring to the Indian subcontinent. That is why in recent days, India has actually looked at the possibility of changing its name. Okay. The Japanese bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Obviously this is a huge thing in history, and it's obviously very devastating and caused tens of thousands of immediate deaths and hundreds of thousands of deaths later on, and that is the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima by the Japanese, or by the Americans against the Japanese, and this was the best way that they could end World War II. At least this is what President Truman thought. The story of how those two cities get bombed starts with Albert Einstein, actually. When Einstein left Germany and came to the United States, and one of the reasons he left Germany to come to the United States was because he was Jewish, and so he knew he was going to be targeted by the Nazis. Einstein encouraged President Roosevelt to build a superweapon because he believed that the Nazis were building a superweapon, which they definitely were, and they were actually close to achieving it. So Roosevelt created the Manhattan Project, run by a man named Robert J. Oppenheimer. Obviously, the movie Oppenheimer swept the Oscars. Excellent movie, 10 of 10 recommend. Cillian Murphy definitely deserved the Oscar for that. He did a phenomenal job as Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer, there's two places, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and of course Los Alamos, New Mexico, where they practiced and worked and developed the science ready to create atom bombs. And then they used those atom bombs against the Japanese. They successfully tested them in June of 1945, and it was only a couple months later that two of them were dropped, one on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki. Now, why did the Americans decide to use this devastating weapon that destroyed tens of thousands of lives immediately, ruined the environment, leveled the cities, and killed hundreds of thousands later on from radiation poisoning? I mean, some of the pictures from Hiroshima and Nagasaki are hard to look at if you want to look more into it. Well, the main reason was the Americans believed it was the utilitarian approach, that it would best end the war. They had originally intended to use it on the Germans, but the reason they used it on the Japanese was because the Japanese were refusing to surrender even after Germany and Italy were already out of the conflict. And the United States had literally taken every single island they could get until they got as close as possible to the Japanese archipelago. And there was this feeling that they would have to invade Japan. The Japanese were ready for this. They believed that they were fighting for their emperor and fighting for their empire, and that they were doing what was right. And so there was a lot going on there. And basically, the Americans felt that if they invaded Japan, millions of lives would be lost. Allied soldiers, not just Americans, but the British were going to get involved. The Chinese were fighting Japan in China still and might have gotten involved there. The Soviet Union, the Americans are trying to get Joseph Stalin to agree to send Soviet troops into Japan. So there's this feeling that millions of soldiers' lives could be lost, but also civilian lives. The Japanese were arming their own civilians and getting them ready to fight. This would not, the Americans knew the fervor and the spiritedness of the Japanese fighters, especially having witnessed and experienced kamikaze fighting and fighting for small bits of island, tens of thousands of people dying, the fierceness and the gruesomeness of the Japanese fighters, and what they had done at places like Bataan and Nanjing earlier in the war. They weren't going to stop at anything, and they weren't going to be humiliated, and they weren't going to lose. So for Truman and the United States, they felt that the best thing that they could do was drop the two bombs. Again, they had originally intended to use these on the Germans. They had originally intended to get to them before the Germans had, because the Germans had scientists working on them. Some of these scientists, by the way, came to the United States as part of Operation Paperclip. They were not put on trial for their war crimes during World War II and the Holocaust. And some of them helped the United States in the space race and the Cold War against the Soviet Union later on. But interestingly enough, they decided to use the super weapons on the Japanese. They had three. The Japanese didn't know that they had three. They used one on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and when Japan did not surrender after Hiroshima was destroyed, they used one on Nagasaki 3 days later. The Japanese still wanted to keep going until their emperor Hirohito finally came on the radio and said, basically, I want to disavow you of the notion that I am a god. That was a common belief in Japanese culture, and we need to stop fighting this war. And so the Allies, especially the U.S., occupied Japan until the end of the Korean War in 1953. So that's a quick story about the two bombs. Obviously, very fascinating history, controversial decision that a lot of people look back and say, how could we just do this? It is very possible and very likely that the United States would have killed the Allies would have had to kill and would have been killed in far greater numbers had the islands of Japan actually been invaded. However, at the same time, just like a snap of a finger, the switch of a light, you've got tens of thousands of people dying and hundreds of thousands dying within days and months and weeks ahead. That's catastrophic, and that begins the nuclear age and throughout the rest of the Cold War, especially after the Soviets get the A-bomb in 1949, with the creation of intercontinental ballistic missiles and with hydrogen bombs, which are far more deadly than atomic bombs. This creates the fear of global nuclear holocaust and the destruction of not just millions, but billions of lives. So there's a quick explanation about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah, let's see, what else have we got? Hey, welcome, thank you for coming. Glad to have you here. This is my weekly Q&A. I talk about history, and somebody wanted to know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So I hope oh, well, we've got people from Finland. Welcome. Who sent Demicius to India and what he wrote about India in the last one? Interesting. I don't know much about that. There's a lot that I don't know. A lot of people bring up amazing topics that I'm not aware of, and I look into them, and I'm just surprised. So I actually learn a lot from doing this information. West East Germany. I'd love to talk about that. That's really, really cool. The Europa, the Last Battle. I need to see it. I love history documentaries. I just watched a really good one on the Stuart dynasty in England. Really, really fun. But anyways, yeah, what's my favorite? Okay, two really great questions here. Thank you so much. And if you like this content, you like what I'm talking about, you want to hear more, you want to come to weekly live streams, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. How many purges is known in history? That's a good question. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that is very true. That basically Operation Paperclip helped NASA get people to the moon and to space. They also helped develop the V2 rocket, Werner von Braun. This is all well known, all well documented. Some of them worked in very casual spots, and they basically were granted immunity and were given a new life and allowed to live in the United States if they promised to work for the American government. It didn't matter what they were, how they were involved in the Holocaust and things like that. Speaking of World War II and Germany, West, East Germany. So they get divided basically into occupied zones. And the whole question about the rest of the 20th century is, how do we keep Germany from becoming dangerous? Because Germany has now fought not one, but two world wars, and both of them have gone disastrously for mankind. So one of the things that happens is that the Soviets get to Berlin first. The Allies allow them to do this. When the Soviets get to Berlin, that's the capital of Germany, they take over the eastern part of Germany. That occupied zone will later become the Democratic Republic of Germany, or the East German Democratic Republic, which is not democratic or a republic. It is a communist government in East Germany. And Berlin will be divided up because it's the capital of Germany. And the Allied zones, Britain, France, for some reason, and the United States, those zones will become West Germany. And I'm trying to remember, I think it's called the West German Federation or something like that. And half of Berlin will be divided up just like half of Germany is divided up for the rest of the Cold War. So the United States will be able to influence West Germany and West Berlin, and a lot of people from East Germany try to flee into West Germany, and a lot of people from East Berlin try to flee into West Berlin, but Berlin is firmly in East Germany. So a lot of people who go to West Berlin from East Berlin try to escape and go around to get somehow into West Berlin. The East German secret police, the Stasi, keep a watch on free speech. They're very oppressive. And eventually, with the blessing of the Soviet Union and Nikita Khrushchev in 1961, Berlin builds a wall, not to keep people from coming in. The Soviets and the Germans build a wall, not to keep people from coming in, but to keep people from going out into West Berlin and eventually escaping into West Germany. And eventually, it's not till near the end of the 1980s, when the Soviets are kind of collapsing on their own and the Cold War is near an end, that the wall comes down and East and West Berlin are united, and eventually all of Germany will be reunited. So there's some history on West East Germany. What's my favorite time period? I love basically any kind of history I can study and learn about and grow with. So I have all sorts of different historical periods that I enjoy. I really appreciate that question. Some people would say the one I love the most is the one I'm learning now. But really, the truth of the matter is the one I know the most about is 19th and 20th century European history, which is what I'm talking about right now. So I know a lot about that. I know a lot about U.S. history. I'm more of a Western historian. My emphasis, my master's, is in Western history in the 19th century. So And to someone who said that I'm a professor, thank you. Not yet, but that's the goal. Let's see, Yugoslavia and World War One. So Yugoslavia is actually created by World War One, and it's this way when the Austro-Hungarian Empire is broken down into different groups, and a way to unite the Slavs and a bunch of the people in that area that they can't. The Allies basically just decide to throw them all together into Yugoslavia. You might be talking about Yugoslavia in World War II. They're led by different partisan groups, and a man named Josip Tito eventually becomes the leader of these partisans, and he's a communist. He doesn't like Stalin, so he doesn't join the Warsaw Pact or really fight in the Cold War. He makes his country non-aligned, but he's beloved because he led the rebels against the Nazis in World War II during the occupation, and he becomes the dictator of Yugoslavia throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And apparently, from what I have read, he is not as brutal or repressive as Stalin or other communist dictators. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the subscription. Okay. Yeah, missile development in World War II. It's funny. It's not a positive thing. It might be a necessary thing, but the technology of the Industrial Revolution is used by the Europeans to make themselves rich and then to kill each other in World War One. And it's the same in World War II. And the same technology that can produce amazing things like this iPhone, where I can broadcast and people from Finland and Australia can tune in and listen to the channel, which I really appreciate, by the way, that can be used to create horrible, despicable weapons that can kill millions of people in an instant. And it's at the grip of our fingertips. What are we going to use it for? That's what history talks about. Our humans use things for productive things, and they use things for destruction too. Okay, what do you think if Axis not invade USSR? Yeah, I just talked about Operation Barbarossa. The Soviet Union and the Germans, who hated each other, the Third Reich, because communists hate Nazis because they are nationalists, and Nazis hate communists because they are not nationalists, even though they are both socialistic in origin and totalitarian and ambitious and like to spread their ideology by force. Just had a really good video about this. At least I hope it was a really good video. But basically, if the Germans had not invaded the Soviet Union, I don't think they would have gotten their butts whipped by the Russian summer and by the Russian winter and the mobilization of Stalin's forces in Stalingrad. They wouldn't have had these long sieges that really didn't go anywhere, like Stalingrad and Leningrad, which is St. Petersburg. And eventually they would have been able to get the US and the Britain probably to agree to an armistice in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, I do think that it was a huge, huge mistake. But nobody thought it at the time. And they had originally agreed to work together to split up Poland. So the Russians were the most surprised by this invasion. And some historians have written that Stalin actually wanted Hitler to succeed so that he could create oppressive regimes that would eventually become ready for a Marxist revolution. So an interesting theory. Can you tell me about the Commune of Paris? So I believe that's the 18th. There's like 5 French revolutions in the 19th century, and that's a group of revolutionaries who want more rights, better working conditions, very progressive, and they're eventually put down. I think it's in 1848. They actually, in 1830, a bunch of French revolutionaries create barricades and refuse to leave until the military comes in and breaks them down. The 1848 revolution eventually is the communists, which is where we get the term, were eventually crushed, and the government becomes an empire. It ends in, basically the French had revolutions all throughout the 1800s, and they always changed their government because of it. So you had the Revolution of 1830 ending a constitutional monarchy, then one in 1848, which ended the Second French Republic, just for there to be another French empire with Napoleon III, Napoleon's nephew. Then another French Revolution happens in 1871, and he's thrown out of power and replaced with the Fourth French Republic. And I think now we're in the middle of the Fifth French Republic. There's a lot of French republics. Is English history painted in a negative light in American educational system? It didn't used to be. There are many negative things in the English history. I think it's more and more painted that way. A lot of people paint the British as awful with the American Revolution and American history. More recently, people are looking at the sins of the British Empire, particularly in Africa and India, and colonization, slavery. Obviously, they create the 13 colonies. They bring the first slaves in 1619 at Jamestown. They help create the legacy of slavery that endures in America to this day. So there is definitely some negatives. I don't think it is. I don't think it should be. I think history should be presented as a thing that happened with definitely some moral implications to come out of it. What really happened in Tiananmen Square? I'm not I don't know an awful lot about Tiananmen Square. I might be saying that wrong. I know it was a movement of Chinese people to gain more rights and freedoms, probably inspired by the Glasnost and Perestroika, kind of the opening up of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev. And it was a hope that communism in China would start to falter too. And the military crushed it. I believe it was Deng Xiaoping who succeeded Mao Zedong, who actually was opening up markets and opening up communication with the West, who crushed it. And it became an international scandal, and he had to resign. I believe that's it. I don't know much about that. Thank you for liking and subscribing. 5 purges listed in Google. I ask if you could look further into. When you talk about purges, what are you referring to? Are you referring to things like Stalin's purges? I'm not exactly sure. Are you talking about when dictators purge their enemies? I mean, there's more than 5. These happen all the time. Mass purges. Is that are you referring to genocides? Give me an example, and then I might be able to help you a little bit more with that. Let me see, what else? Sarajevo. Sarajevo is obviously where World War I begins, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Austro-Hungarian heir to the empire, is shot and killed by a Serbian nationalist who decided not to assassinate him at first and to go have a sandwich. The sandwich shop was closed, and the car, whatever you want to call it, of the Archduke drove by. He saw him, and then he shot him. So, interesting there. Let me see, what else have I got? Russia purge, 350,000 mass purges. So you're probably referring to Stalin's grand purges, and there's not one of them. There are several that Stalin does. Basically, Myanmar purge. I don't know as much about the Myanmar purge. I think the Cuban purge is when Castro takes over and a bunch of people flee the island, and if they're not, they are imprisoned, and some of them are killed. Thank you. I really appreciate your support. How to start reading history of Europe. If you want to start reading the history of Europe, I would look to the Romans, if you want to go in a chronological order, and look at how the Roman influence seeps into Europe, particularly Western Europe. If you want to look into Eastern Europe, I would look into the Byzantines. So start with either the Western Roman Empire, the Roman Empire in general, or the Byzantines. That's how I'm gonna start, because I'm gonna want to know, how did Europe become Europe? And then I'm going to look at the influence of the Catholic Church, because Europe wasn't even called Europe during the Middle Ages. It was called Christendom, the kingdom of Christ, because the church had such a huge influence. What comment? I'm not sure which comment you're referring to. So there's purges. Basically, every time you have a great example of a purge I think you're thinking of, Amos, is the purge of the Night of the Long Knives, where Hitler removes many leaders, including Ernst Röhm, the head of the SA, who he believes are not loyal to him. Basically, purges happen whenever a dictator comes to power and believes that he is not fully trusted and that his enemies are everywhere and will try to destroy him. So a purge is a way for a dictator to consolidate his power and crush his enemies. Do I like pineapple on pizza? Yes. Very controversial. I know that's far more controversial than any of the other perspectives I have offered today, but yes, I like pineapple on pizza, and I'm not afraid to say that. What's my favorite historical period to read and learn about? Great question. I got that question a little bit earlier. I like 19th century Europe. That's what my master's is in. That's what I've read the most. But I tend to really get suckered into any history I'm reading. So in the last couple of years, I've learned a lot about Eastern, non-Western history, we would call it, and it's fascinating. It's just amazing. I was talking about the Safavid Empire and the Gunpowder Empire, and how during the Renaissance, the Reformation, Columbus coming over here, all of that stuff, that gives you a hint of where I'm from, by the way. You have these 3 really powerful, really rich, really regal and impressive empires that just make these beautiful artworks, beautiful armies, that become really powerful in the Middle East, Central and Southern Asia, the Mughals, the Safavids, and of course the Ottomans. And we only know about the Ottomans because Westerners are taught the history of the Ottoman Empire in World War I and against the Byzantines. Not so much about the Safavids, which are the reason Iran is Shia Muslim, which is the reason we have so much dissension between Muslims in the Middle East today. And when they are not fighting with Westerners, seemingly, they are fighting with each other. That's part of the reason. History matters, and it helps create the world we know today. Meanwhile, you have the Mughal Empire in India, and it's probably best known by its most amazing symbol, the Taj Mahal, which was a tomb built by a Mughal emperor for his wife. It's not a palace. It's not something luxuriant. It is something that is actually a burial place for someone. Okay, yeah, beautiful armies. Powerful, magnificent. I used the wrong adjective. Yeah, that's an interesting historical combination. Gorbachev was very old. I think he was 92. I don't know if there's anything symbolic about that. Uh, yeah, 92. Yeah. I don't think Gorbachev would have ever done something like that. Obviously, when countries in Eastern Europe started to break off from the Soviet regime, he kind of just let them go. If you go back in time for 2 minutes, where would you go? Wow, that's a very good question. I like that. Great questions, everyone. I really appreciate that. And if you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my daily content. But where would I go? I want to talk to Napoleon. I want to say, dude, leave Russia alone. You're not going to be able to get to England. The reason Napoleon invaded Russia, by the way, was because he hated England so much. Russia had been part of what was called the Continental System, which was where Napoleon starved his enemies, particularly the British, by forcing his allies on the continent and all the puppet states he created not to trade with them. And when Russia started to suffer and the Tsar, Alexander I, said, I'm not going to do this anymore, Napoleon invades Russia with the Grande Armée. I would tell Napoleon, you have an amazing record. You can live the rest of your life comfortably. Great Britain is not going away. You know you can't invade it. Don't go into Russia because they're fierce. He underestimated them. He was amazed that they burned their own capital. He gets to Moscow, which is what he wants. Moscow's not the capital at that point, St. Petersburg, but he gets to Moscow, which is the cultural capital of Russia and now currently the capital of Russia. And he thinks that he's won, and then the Russians burn the city to the ground, just like they've been burning all the fields and ground that he had been covering in his march to Moscow. And in disgrace and retreat, him and the large army he has leave, and that's when guerrilla war tactics help the Russians defeat him. So I want to go and talk to Napoleon. I find him to be one of the most fascinating people in history. Obviously, Jesus of Nazareth, Caesar, Cleopatra, Lincoln, they're all on my list. If I'm talking to anyone from the East, I'm going to talk to Genghis Khan, people like that. So the CIA is what happened to Tiananmen Square. I don't know much about that. I'm looking more into that. Can I talk about the Byzantine Empire? I love the Byzantine Empire. One thing that's interesting is that nobody considered them Byzantines. They considered them Romans. So when the Pope crowned Charlemagne the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of the Romans, this offends the Byzantine Empress. I think her name was Theodora. I'm not sure, but she's so offended because there's only one Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, that had survived the fall of the West, with their capital at Constantinople. They aren't called the Byzantines until the 16th century, which is after they were destroyed by the Ottomans, as a matter of fact. And see how it's all connected, all going around, all the same thing. But basically, the Ottomans the Byzantine Empire, that name, is because the city of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, was originally called Byzantium. It was a Greek city called Byzantium. Then it becomes Constantinople under Constantine. Then the Ottomans change its name back to Istanbul, or change it to Istanbul, which it is today. And they changed the Hagia Sophia Church, the huge cathedral there, into a mosque, which is a common feature of Muslim conquest. But yeah, so the Byzantine Empire, really powerful. They're Greek-speaking, so they originally considered the Roman Empire. They're very close to Europe or Christendom in the Middle Ages because they are all Christians. But as time goes on, because they speak Greek and because their religious traditions are a little bit different, they split away from the Catholic Church in 1054. It's called the Great Schism, and that's why you have the Catholics and you have the Orthodox. And the Greek Orthodox Church is the church that dominates the Eastern Roman Empire. They're in bad decline because of the Muslim conquest. The Crusades actually start with Western European Christians trying to help the Byzantines fight back the Muslims and relieve that empire. And they actually, in the Fourth Crusade, basically just say, hey, the Byzantines are our enemy too, and they sack the city of Constantinople and take over it and kick the Byzantines out for a while. So the same Christians who were supposed to help them eventually betrayed them. But the Byzantines, really fascinating, really amazing, and they just are in steady decline until the 15th century, and the Muslims destroy them. And a bunch of the Byzantine scholars and writers who are well-versed in Greek humanism and Greek philosophy and Greek poetry come to Italy and the West and help spur on the Renaissance. So the Renaissance is partly because the Byzantines collapse. Yeah, okay. I'm glad that they've updated. There's a lot of purges in history. There's definitely not 5. I would like, again, I'd have to look more into that. Yeah, Christianity spread through the world through Spain, kind of. The Inquisition. So the Inquisition is set up as a church council to inquire into people and to torture them and murder them and put them on trial for renouncing the Catholic faith. Back then, the basic idea amongst Catholics And this was true amongst Orthodox and the early Protestants. It's not really until the 18th century and the Enlightenment and the United States we get religious tolerance, separation of church and state, all that great stuff. But basically, during the Inquisition, the belief of Christendom, of the Christians, was it's better for you to die now and go to hell than for you to spread these ideas, other people to leave the faith, and all of you go to hell. So if Bob is one person spreading, just random name, Bob is one random person spreading heresy, he's going to go to hell. So, but if he spreads it to 4 other people and they all become heretics, they're all going to go to hell. So to save their souls, we have to stop Bob. So we'll kill Bob. And that's kind of, so Christianity is well entrenched by the time of the Inquisition, but it's a way to keep Europe Christian. Anyways, I'll stop stuttering when you do. What's your opinion on the people that say Holodomor is worse than the Holocaust? Just curious. The Holodomor is technically worse than the Holocaust. It's the biggest purge. What do you want to call it? Genocide. It's bigger proportionally. The thing about the Holocaust that's obviously, Holocaust is not excusable at all. It's a terrible, awful thing. But the thing about the Holodomor is you have people basically systematically starved to death, and you have more people dying daily proportionally over the few years that it happened in the Soviet Union, Western Russia, and the Ukraine, than you have people dying in the Holocaust. Obviously, the reasons are different, and I think that the Holodomor is not talked about enough. And in some ways it's worse, and in some ways the Holocaust is worse. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's true. That is on the Turkish flag. It's on many Muslim flags, the star, the crest. Some people have speculated it's because Allah was the ancient Arabian god of the moon. That isn't true. Allah is supposed to be the god of Abraham in Islam, but but I'm not sure exactly where the crescent moon comes. I think it's a symbol that has existed for a long time in Islam. The Bengal famine, I don't know much about that, but yes, if I'm correct, that is when 3 million people died because of the British not giving them. The British have done this multiple times. They did it to the Irish in the potato famine. They basically said, we need to keep the potatoes, so Ireland, you don't get as many. And you got millions of people dying. Okay. Let's see. Report. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. How long have I been yapping? Probably since I could talk. Let me see, what else? What are your thoughts on the HRE? It is neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. I agree with Voltaire. And it's neither holy, Roman, nor an empire because it starts off that way with the Catholics crowning Charlemagne, and it's an empire with an emperor. And it's Roman because Charlemagne ruled over Italy, but it's eventually divided down, and it basically becomes just a bunch of German states that elect their ruler, and they fight when the Protestant Reformation happens between Catholics and Protestants constantly, so there's nothing holy about that. The church doesn't control it because it's divided. There's no Romans, it's all German by that point, and it's one of the only few things German people had in common was being part of the Holy Roman Empire. And it's more than just Germany. It's Austria, and Bohemia is modern-day Czechoslovakia, so it's a bunch of different ethnic peoples, most of whom speak German. And the emperor really doesn't have any power. He's elected, so it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Would you consider the what? It's similar. It's not exactly the same. Targeted starvation as opposed to gathering resources in the midst of a famine is different. A huge way the Irish escape the famine, which the Chinese farmers do not have at their advantage, is fleeing, and many of them come to the United States, and that's why there's a huge Irish influx in the first wave of migration in the United States. Harlem Renaissance, great stuff, love it. So basically, starting in the beginning of the 20th century, particularly during World War I, African Americans moved from the South to the North for more job opportunities, less discrimination, and to build their culture. And they build really, really famous communities in places like Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and of course, New York. So these cities, which were predominantly white before, today are very well known for having large African-American populations, and part of that is because of what's called the Great Migration. And they developed their own culture, and they developed their own neighborhoods, and their best neighborhood, their most famous one during the Roaring '20s, the age of jazz and prohibition when alcohol wasn't available, but jazz music and radios were, is Harlem. And Harlem is where African American culture flourishes. You have writers, Langston Hughes is a great example, Zora Neale Hurston, and you also have music. You have jazz clubs, and you have white people becoming interested in this and actually going to Harlem and enjoying themselves and dancing and going to clubs and sitting next to black people. And it actually brings a little bit more racial empathy and understanding. And it becomes a metropolis of culture, art, literature, and really stands out as a highlight of African American contributions to the to Americana. So yeah. How often am I live? I am live every Saturday at 6 Eastern, and I might be doing that a little bit more if I get more traffic and stuff like that. It's kind of up to me, but I'm live for an hour at least, doing the Q&A, talking about topics that come to my mind. I originally wanted to talk about the Safavids and the empires. I was going to talk a little bit about the Democratic Convention. I've been covering a little bit of politics, trying to be impartial as possible on the channel, and was going to talk about RFK dropping out. But you guys have brought up such great topics that I just really love to answer questions and stuff like that. What do you think about Rajputs? I mean, I don't know anything about that. It sounds like you're talking about India, Afghanistan. I was talking about Afghanistan. Something true about Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and that whole region of the world, it's extremely tribal. And it's linguistic, and they're different. The thing that has united Afghanistan and made it one whole real country, the only huge unifying thing of these disparate tribes is Islam. Islam has been the central thing that has united Afghanistan and given it a semblance as a country. What is my favorite war to talk about? I think World War II is easy because there's just so much there. I love the War of the Roses. I talk about that in the channel a lot. I just love, it's the inspiration for Game of Thrones, by the way, the War of the Roses. I love the Middle Ages a lot and the warfare there and knights and ladies and stuff like that. The Crusades are fascinating. I did a real fun series on the Crusades. Anyways, you are, let me see. Thank you. I really appreciate all the compliments. Would you consider I'm sorry it took me a while to get to the Harlem Renaissance. Opinion on black people? Okay. Never mind. I'm not going to get into that. I had one person in the channel a couple weeks ago. We had a lot of people then basically saying, why are you so racist? What do you think about, and do you think slavery is okay? And I'm like, okay, no, but this is a good time to teach about the history of slavery. Kodak Black, and it doesn't. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, I appreciate hearing that. I mean, and the only thing that a historian needs to inspire him is another great historian. So I hope that's my thing. What is your favorite battle? My favorite, Alesia is awesome. I love how Caesar basically just sees a wall and just builds another wall to starve him. I love what Alexander does at Tyre, building that ramp. Let's see. Battles are tough because there's just so many good ones. The Bulge is interesting. Basically how it's kind of the Germans' last-ditch offensive to really trap and keep the Americans out of Germany in World War II. There's a lot there. Where was I during 9/11? I was very young. So anyways, let me see. Anything else that's substantive I want to talk about? I would like to learn more about the Durga Sponsi clan. That sounds really, really interesting. Yes, the U.S. was the last place to really use slavery and was one of the first to get rid of it. I wouldn't say it's the last. There are 10 million slaves living today in Africa. And the Arab slave trade, the Ottoman slave trade continued continued throughout the 19th century. It was actually the British and the French who used their navies and their fleets, which were expansive and strong, to stop the slave trade. Mendelian genetics. Mendel. Are you talking about Father Gregor Mendel and the creation of Punnett squares? Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, one of the best compliments I ever received was one guy who said, every time I was in college and we were both history majors, and he said to me, oh, every time I bring up a historical topic, you already know about it. And I'm like, that's what I do. Hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. So if you've liked this content, if you've enjoyed it, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, and come back for more. but we've got another 15 minutes or here. So I was talking about the Safavids a little bit earlier. I was going to talk a little bit about the historic convention we just witnessed and the historic dropping third party campaign of RFK. It still exists at any. What still exists? At any time. Yeah. So slavery, one of the biggest items of slavery we have nowadays is sex slavery. Human trafficking, that's child trafficking, just absolutely awful. So we do have slavery continuing. It's a common practice, and unfortunately, it might be something that is extremely hard to eradicate because slavery in different forms, in different ways, has existed in all of human history. Thousands of years before Africans ever saw a white person, they were enslaving each other, and the Romans who were white were enslaving other white people. Millions of Europeans, the term slave comes from the same root as Slav, Eastern European people. Europeans were being enslaved by Muslims because Muslims cannot enslave other Muslims. This is actually how the Africans got into the slave trading business, was when Arab slave traders went to Africa trying to get slaves. And other goods too, and to spread Islam. And slaves in Central America, especially under the Aztecs, were used for human sacrifice. It was a way to depopulate their enemy and they would get their tribute not in gold but in slaves. What about the DNC was historic? So the simple answer, yeah. I hope it ends. God knows, I hope it ends. And I think the best way to help something end, especially from a historian's perspective, is to make people aware of it, is to give people the information and the tools to know that it's there, know how it's looked in the past, and know what we can do to stop it in the future. So what about the DNC was historic? So I'm not going to get too political. I try to be as impartial on the channel as possible. I have been talking about politics a little bit more because I think we're in the midst of a historic election. Obviously, the biggest historic thing that happened at the convention was the Democratic Party became the first major political party in American history to nominate a woman of color at the top of their ticket. They have been the first in several things with women, although the first woman elected to Congress was actually a Republican elected in 1916, Jeanette Rankin from Montana, 4 years before the 19th Amendment. You also have Geraldine Ferraro, 40 years ago, who just, I think, passed away this year. She was nominated as vice president for the Democrats. There were women nominated on earlier tickets for different parties, but in like third parties. Joe Jorgensen is the most recent example, and Jill Stein, who both ran in 2020. Stein is running this year in 2024 for the Green Party. So third parties, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. The third parties have done it. A lot of small parties have done it. The Votes for Women Party did it. But the Republicans and the Democrats hadn't nominated a woman for the top of the ticket until Hillary Clinton in 2016, the wife of President Bill Clinton. Then the Democrats went farther, nominating the first woman of color to be vice president in 2020 with President Biden. Now she has become heir apparent to Biden in the last month since he dropped out of the race and was confirmed at the convention along with her vice president, Tim Walz. And the 2024 Democratic National Convention is historic in another way, in that it's history repeating itself, or as Mark Twain said, rhyming a lot. Thank you. I really appreciate all of the good publicity. Why does some German berets in World War II have some sort of RAF circle? A lot of symbols, a lot of crests, a lot of coat of arms in Europe look horribly similar. The English coat of arms during the Middle Ages was half French because they owned huge swathes of land in France and wanted everyone to know it. So the coats of arms, the symbols, they're usually very powerful, usually very what we call toxically masculine nowadays, or you've got strong animals or things like that. Yeah, it's the whole point that I'm trying to make. I'm not playing identity politics by saying Mrs. Harris is a woman, so therefore you should vote for her, and she's also a black woman, so you should vote for her, and she's also South Asian. She's the first Asian. There was actually a Native American nominated vice president, Charles Curtis. He was vice president under Herbert Hoover. So we have had a Native American vice president, interestingly enough. But it's not about her being a woman. It's not about her being black. It's not about her being Indian. it is about the fact that it is a historic moment that she was nominated for this. And a lot of people would say, well, she kind of just inherited it and was not elected properly. And that is true in the primary process, that she was not, this was not a generally normal primary in any sense of the word. She kind of just was appointed the Democratic nominee. However, a nominee is a nominee is a nominee. And if she wins, she'll become the first woman president, the first woman of color president, and the first Asian president. And all those things are very interesting. And of course, as a historian, I want, first things. Historians love first things. But historians also love, but as a person, I obviously want the best leader. So it's can she be a good leader is obviously the big question. You're talking about the marriage between the Queen of Castile and the King of Aragon. Okay. It's better than the alternative, Geraldine Ferraro. I did talk about her. I was just talking about her, first woman ever nominated for vice president with Walter Mondale in 1984. Unfortunately, they ran up against the juggernaut that was the Reagan administration and lost badly. But she remained an influential member and leader in the Democratic Party until her death, and I think she just died this year. And I know that Walter Mondale died either last year or the year before that. And Jimmy Carter, by the way, will be 100. If Mondale had been Carter's vice president, Jimmy Carter will be 100 if he makes it to October 1st. He's in hospice care. That would also be a first in American history. So we could see a lot of firsts. We could also see a second. If Donald Trump wins, he would become the second president to win 2 non-consecutive terms, Grover Cleveland being the first. Yeah, I've been needing to get that fixed for a while. Thank you for pointing it out so everyone on the internet can see it. Anyways, what was I going to say? Yeah. What else was I going to say? Is he the oldest president to live? Do you mean Trump? Biden is the oldest president. He's already broken all those records. And he would be the oldest he was the oldest elected. I think he's older than Trump was. Trump will be about the same age he is if he wins and when he leaves office. Is the oldest president to live? Yes. Oh, Carter. Yeah, Carter is the oldest. We've had several presidents: Gerald Ford, John Adams, Herbert Hoover, and Ronald Reagan, who all lived well into their 90s, but Carter is in his late 90s. Thank you, I appreciate that. But anyways, White Banana asked about the marriage between the Queen of Castile and King of Aragon. So basically, Spain is conquered by the Muslims in the 700s, and after that, or the late 600s, and later on, the Spanish are slowly but surely in revolutionaries. They're pushing back the Muslims. It takes a while, and it's not easy, but they do it. And 2 kingdoms emerge. One is Castile and one is Aragon. And Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon eventually marry each other and unite to defeat the Muslims. And in 1492, they defeat the Emirate. An Emirate is an Arab kingdom or Muslim kingdom of Granada, kicking the Muslims out of Spain. They then begin exiling Jews and Muslims who live in Spain, and they marry, and they run their own governments, but Spain is basically united from here on out. And their child, their son, will become the King of Spain. And he is a man named Charles, who becomes the Holy Roman Emperor and is also the Emperor of Austria. And he's a Habsburg, Charles V, one of history's most famous rulers. And so to celebrate their victory over the Muslims in Granada, which is the huge news of 1492, they hire a Genoese merchant who believes he's found a route to India. And that's obviously Columbus. But that was just kind of a footnote to the celebration of kicking the Muslims out of Spain. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Seth. It would be great if we had a woman president. Is she the right one? That's up to you to decide. That's up to me to decide. Am I making stuff up? No. They ran out of Moors. Kind of. The Moors had been what the Muslims in Spain, which they called Al-Andalus, had been around for a while. And they slowly but surely were pushed out. And to celebrate, obviously, the Spanish are going to fall on a gold mine with Columbus landing originally in the Caribbean, and eventually in his last voyage in the country that bears his name to this day, Colombia. So there's some stuff there about Ferdinand and Isabella, the marriage that brought Spain together and was able to defeat the Muslims and kick them out. What else? Let's see here. So Back to what I was talking about with the convention. So there is a lot of history repeating itself, and I plan to do a video on this. But one of the things that we see at this convention is being held in Chicago, which the Democrats held. I believe the last time they held their convention in Chicago was 1968. 1968, there were huge protests outside the DNC in Chicago by people protesting the war in Vietnam. This year, there were huge protests outside the DNC in Chicago protesting the war with Israel and Hamas. In 1968, the unpopular president, who many people believe could not handle the war properly, dropped out of the race. In 2024, likewise, that was Lyndon Johnson. In 2024, another unpopular president who many believe couldn't handle the Israel-Hamas war properly, Joe Biden, dropped out, probably more due to his advanced age and questions about mental acuity. But you have these amazing parallels. And when I was watching clips on Monday, seeing the protesters, I was just stunned the way history repeats itself. And a lot of these protesters try to break into the convention and overthrow the convention. I believe there was even a sign that said Kamala Harris's promotes genocide, and it was torn down immediately as soon as it put up by pro-Pally protesters. So there's a lot of so Mark Twain famously said, "History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes a lot," and there's a lot of repetition there. In 1968, the vice president was brought and put in charge of the party, Hubert Humphrey. Humphrey was elected in the primary, unlike Harris, but Hubert Humphrey, interestingly enough, was from Minnesota, like Walter Mondale, and also Tim Walz, interesting enough, another vice presidential Democratic candidate from Minnesota, which actually has the longest Democratic voting record in American history. It has voted Democratic for 52 years. It's the longest streak in presidential politics in American history. It's been Democratic every single presidential election. So some really interesting stuff here. A lot of strange parallels are going on. You've got the vice president taking over for the president. The last time a president dropped out of a presidential race for re-election was 1968. The Democrats had their convention in Chicago then. They had their convention in Chicago now. Huge protests from left-wingers in 1968. Huge protests from left-wingers in 2024. A lot of uncanny parallels. And if that's not enough, you also have Trump. Trump is a comeback candidate running after losing a presidential election. Richard Nixon, the Republican in 1968, who also was accused of a lot of criminal activities and was seen as shady and corrupt by a lot of people and hated by a lot of people and definitely made a lot of enemies, even had his own enemies list. There's a lot of parallels for a lot of people between Trump and Nixon. Came back, got the nomination, and was trying to win. He hadn't previously been president, he'd been vice president, but Nixon, also there's parallels on the Republican side. Nixon had lost the 1960 election by a razor-thin margin to John F. Kennedy, and a lot of people believed that the mafia had been involved to help Kennedy win that election. Because of that, a lot of people think to this day that that election was rigged. So there were questions about the 1960 election being rigged, just like there are questions amongst Trump and his supporters about the 2020 election being rigged. The parallels are uncanny. Nixon, unlike Trump, chose not to protest the election results in 2020. Or in 2016, because sorry about that, got cut off for a second. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. But anyways, so I don't know what the last thing you heard was, but basically Nixon thought that the 1960 election might have been stolen from him. He chose not to protest because he thought he would divide the nation. Trump didn't do that, but there were questions around the legitimacy of that election. And so the parallels between the Republican candidate who had an election, who worried that an election was stolen from him and complained about it, who was trying to win again, and the Democrat who had been whose vice president replaced him at the top of the ticket because of his unpopularity and possibly because of a war, and with major protests going on in Chicago, people protesting a war from the left, there's a huge amount of historically uncanny things between the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago and the 2024 one. So if you didn't think it was a historic convention before, I'm sure you might think it's now. Oh, it was in 1996 they held it in Chicago? That I didn't know. So it wasn't the last one they held in Chicago. That one was, I imagine, pretty peaceful. That was when Clinton defeated Dole. Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's really interesting. I'm glad you're writing about that. That's fascinating. Yeah, there was very little attention, but I saw it a lot on social media. I'm growing my social media platform. I am on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. The handles are in the channel. Someone usually puts them on here, but Actually saw, I didn't see it in the mainstream media, which is really losing a lot of steam in this country, in my opinion, in the United States. But there was a lot of it on X. So, um, okay, let's see. Thank you. I really appreciate all the compliments. Yeah, they sponsored Columbus. Columbus had gone to a bunch of different countries, and no one wanted to sponsor him. They sponsored him. So that is why, despite the fact that Columbus is an Italian, and actually Columbus Day was created as a way to celebrate Italian Americans, and to celebrate Italian heritage because of discrimination against Italians before. So yeah, that's actually where it comes from. But yeah, they sponsored Columbus. And we Americans created Columbus Day as a way to celebrate Italian Americans who were being discriminated against. Now they have renamed Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day to celebrate the indigenous peoples who were destroyed by the Spanish and the Americans. My personal opinion, you should have 2 days to celebrate both. Important request. Where do you get your news from? I look at everything. So I bragged once that my laptop had Breitbart, which is a really right-wing news site, next to Al Jazeera, which is known as very left-wing, right in the middle of the Palestine-Israel war. So yeah, I try to get my news from as many sources as possible. I try to verify it. I try to read data. As a historian, I know the importance of primary sources, of looking at the actual information, and I know the importance of looking at secondary sources and what they say. And a lot of the news that's reported today, unfortunately, seems to be secondary news, especially with a lot of pundits, a lot of omission, and a lot of commentary from journalists who are not pundits. So I try to go from everything. I try to go everywhere: left, right, middle, up, down, everywhere. So yeah. Yeah, I don't have any of the links listed in the channel. There is a post on YouTube. I forgot to pin that comment at the beginning. Yes, that was in 1996. Yeah, you've got to look at both sides. You got to do different perspectives. What's the worst weapon of World War II in your opinion? I'm not exactly sure. I'm dating myself. My best guess would be the Renfield. If I've got, I think that, but that was, I just learned about those guns from Call of Duty, to be fully honest with you. Don't vote. Yeah, so that was the everything I wanted to talk about, and I'll talk about it briefly, and we are over an hour, so I will wrap it up soon. But obviously, the convention drew in really high ratings. There were a lot of people there. The Obamas gave really powerful speeches. Oprah gave a powerful speech. The last night was supposed to be a guest speaker who just turned out to be Harris, which was kind of confusing. But a lot of people really liked the energy and the enthusiasm on the Democratic side. And then just to blunt that, the next day, Robert Kennedy drops out and endorses Donald Trump. And I've done a couple of videos about that, but that could really blunt the impact of the Democratic convention, with a lot of people thinking that Kennedy's supporters will go to Trump, who would otherwise vote Democratic because Kennedy was a Democrat. He's obviously from the Kennedy line. His father was Robert Kennedy. His uncle was JFK. His other uncle was Ted Kennedy. So here's a guy who's very involved in presidential politics, grew up surrounded by it, who's kind of turned on his party, endorsed someone he never thought he would endorse, and that has really shifted the narrative for a lot of people. So that could really blunt the momentum that the Democrats were hoping to create with the convention and with Harris. And like I said, with all the history around this convention, around Harris's nomination, and all of that. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for tuning in from Sweden. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate all the support and the subscriptions and things like that, and to see some of my favorites who are here every week. You guys are the best. So we'll see. Oh well, I'm not here on Sundays. It's every Saturday at 6. But I'm tempted to do one tomorrow at 6, especially after this showing, because everyone's just been so great. I'll maybe put up a poll and see about doing multiple ones a week. Who nominated Harris? There technically was no primary. Yeah, that's the big thing surrounding Harris's candidacy that I think a lot of people are missing. This kind of just seems rushed and forced. And it's kind of only been it's been a month, and a month ago Joe Biden dropped out of the race, which he was adamant before that he was not going to do. It took him some convincing. Who knows exactly what it was? There's a lot of rumors of backroom politics, which is not uncommon in American history, not uncommon in political history. So it's nothing. There's nothing wrong with me saying. There's nothing biased about me saying there was something happening in the back room, which I believe, and I think it's reasonable to believe that. She was kind of just appointed. All the delegates who had been pledged to Biden, because there was a primary, Democratic primary, there wasn't any real strong challenge. There was just primary elections. This happen all the time, whether the president is challenged or not. But there were votes. There is a democratic process, and Biden went through that. She didn't. She just got the rewards of Biden's supporters because it was so late in the process. Nobody expected Biden to drop out in June. Although some people on the right were rumoring about it for years, they actually turned out to be correct about this one, that Biden would not make it through, make it to another term. And so there's a lot going on there. There was no primary technically. She was kind of just anointed and appointed to this position, which is understandable given the circumstances. But there were some Democrats who were saying in the couple days afterwards, maybe there should be a primary. Maybe there should be just a little something. Maybe the convention should vote. And that quickly went away. It's not democratic. It's strange to me that the party that calls itself Democrats wouldn't do something democratic. But political parties not doing what they say they're going to do is nothing new in politics throughout the world. And a misnomer of a political party or a government is not uncommon either. So there was a lot going on with that. It's part, and I would argue really that that's part of the history, isn't it? That's what makes part of this historic. I've mentioned a lot of the positive things about the Democratic Convention, some of the eerie things connected back to 1968, but maybe something that's not so positive is the fact that this really came out of left field. And this really happened without anyone really, this has never happened before, where a president was kind of rushed off in at the end of the primary and someone else put in that position. Yeah, I expect that. Well, I think that when Trump got shot, the convention happened, the Republicans were sitting pretty. And I honestly believe that Trump was going to win. I still am inclined to think he will win, but it's going to be a lot, but it's a lot closer now. So it was like the Democrats pulled a no holds bar and broke their own rules and broke history in a way, because this has never happened before, of just kind of selecting Harris. Because even in 1968, when Johnson dropped out and Humphrey became the vice president, Humphrey had to go through the primary process. He was actually going to lose to Robert F. Kennedy Sr., who probably would have beat Nixon and created another Kennedy dynasty after his brother had been president and he had been attorney general. He got shot and killed in California, and that has probably left a huge scar, of course, as it would for anyone, on RFK Jr. But it has also greatly impacted. It has greatly impacted American politics. Humphrey from there became the favorite, won the primary, and was nominated at the convention. And primary season isn't what it used to be. The way it's so structured and every state votes, and we all know, and it's kind of seeing, that's newer in American history. Usually in the past, conventions just selected and voted. But with the parties becoming larger and this becoming a bigger country, the need for a more democratic primary gained a lot of steam. So in some ways, this is almost like a retro sort of thing, but without any precedent whatsoever, because there's usually no one getting selected at the convention. There's usually, when there were conventions in the past, you had multiple candidates going at it. There was none. There was Kamala Harris, and that was it. Anyways, why are American politics so tedious? Because why is it so divided? Why is America in such bad straits? Why is politics so bad? One of the reasons I think that's the case is because the real truth of the matter is that Americans treat politics like it's sports. You have your team, I have my team. I'm going to wear red, you're going to wear blue. And vote blue no matter who, or red till I'm dead. And it's a form of a little, although sometimes not a little, sometimes even less, a little bit more intellectually stimulating, psychological, tribalistic warfare than sports. And the media influence. The media definitely likes to stir the pot because it gets them attention. Let's see. It comes down to the battleground states. Yeah, it will come down to those states, and I will be talking about that. I will probably do, I know people do this on YouTube, and I really like it. I don't know how to do it, and it's not really my field, but like an election prediction, I'll probably do one of those. I might even do it on a live stream right before the election. Um, okay, yeah, I've heard those rumors about the Trump attempted assassination. Some people said it was glass. And you know, your ear, if you get winged by a bullet, it will take off some of the skin, but it won't take off all part of his ear. It's not like the bullet went into his ear or lopped off his ear. You can graze, bullets can graze or wing someone, and part of the skin can be taken off. So that's very possible. Um, I know a lot of people think it was a hoax. A lot of people have that conspiracy theory. Um, yes, it's very true. It's not supposed to be this way. The founders would be outraged by the tribalism. Um, and I've often been of the mindset that people like Trump are the worst representatives of that tribalism, and in some ways he absolutely is. But at the same time, politics has always been like this. I mean, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, founders of this country, were throwing huge barbs at each other in 1800. But also, there seems to be, it's not like the other side has never done what Trump is doing. It's just that he's the loudest at it. Do you think the Green Party has a legitimate chance? No, I don't think third parties have legitimate chances. I'm not trying to be mean. I am interested in third party politics. I think it's a fascinating part of American history. But I think that what people are hoping, what Kennedy is trying to do, he didn't drop out of every single state. He's on the ballot in 40 of the red blue states: California, Alabama, I, I guess Texas. I don't know if Texas is a battleground yet. But so people, and he said to his supporters, vote for me in those states. The reason he's doing that, he dropped out and endorsed Trump so that Trump could win the battleground states. He encouraged his supporters to support Trump in those states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia. But the non-battleground states, the rest of the states, the hope has always been that an independent, third-party, libertarian, green candidate will get at least 5% of the vote. If she or he does this, then that will create a new level of funding and opportunity. It will get new polling, it will get new media attention, and it could start to create cracks in the two-party system. The rest of the world is not like this and never has been. England, France, Germany, Israel. Their parliaments are coalition governments with a bunch of different political parties working together that don't always feel the same way. So, I heard you mention. So I don't mean to be mean to Stein. I don't mean to be mean to Chase Oliver, I think is his name, or to RFK. But RFK said in his speech yesterday, "I will only drop out if I don't think there's a chance of winning." And I'm like, you're just now discovering that you don't have a chance to win? That kind of comes out of left field. So that's not something that I expected to happen. So, anyways, I didn't expect him to drop out. I didn't expect him to say that he had a huge chance at winning. It's been very surprising that he has. But now he's out of the race, and this could really blunt the momentum the Democrats had created with their very high ratings during their convention and give Trump a push that he needs to take back the momentum that he has lost. Because after getting shot, after the convention, after Biden's debate performance, it looked over. And now it's not over. So we'll see. American politics is interesting, and it's fascinating in an intellectual way, but it's also tedious because it is just a long drawn slugfest and sport. So I hope I've answered. I don't see any more questions really. I really appreciate all of the support. I appreciate you guys subscribing. And who knows, maybe I'll be back here tomorrow night at 6 Eastern. But at the very least, I will be back here next next Saturday. I keep saying Wednesday because it starts with we and we week and all of that stuff. But next Saturday, at the very least, I will be here 6 Eastern. Please come and show your support. Check out my channel, all of the videos and information. I really appreciate all of your support, comments, feedback, and everything. And also really appreciate you guys bringing up different topics and hearing from people all over the world: Finland, Sweden, Germany, India, Australia. It's always really, really fun. All right. Thank you. I'm glad you discovered it too. I'm glad to have you along. And I like to say, and people ask me, are you the friendly neighborhood historian? I'm like, no, the people who subscribe, you are the friendly neighborhood historians. So I dub the friendly neighborhood historians. And hopefully I will see you either tomorrow or at the very latest next Saturday. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye.